You ever get that feeling, like the universe is holding its breath, waiting to drop something heavy on your back? That was me. On a Tuesday night, half past midnight, laying on the sofa like some second-hand houseplant. I wasn't asleep, not even close. Just had my eyes shut, soaking in the silence of a home that didn't feel like mine anymore. You live long enough with someone, you start to recognize when something's off, even if they smile the same, kiss you goodnight the same. My wife, Harper, had been off for months. I didn't know what I was expecting to hear. Maybe her on the phone with her mom. Maybe Netflix echoing from the bedroom. Instead, I heard voices. Two of them. Hers. And her sister, Rin. It was the way Rin spoke that sent a chill down my spine. Hushed, like they were planning a heist. It's the only way, Harp. You loved him. This would keep a part of him alive. Her late husband. Rin was talking about Eli. Dead 2 years now, tragically lost in a car wreck that nearly split their whole family. I was the guy Harper married after that, the safe bet, I guess. The fixer. The one who helped her through the grief, paid the bills, cooked dinner, built the goddamn crib. But then Harper spoke. What if James finds out? I didn't even breathe. He won't. He can't. We'll do it through the clinic. Quiet. Discreet. Just use the samples Eli stored before his last surgery. This child, it'll be yours and Eli's in a way. And James? He'll raise it none the wiser. I sat up slowly, quietly. The edges of the world turned sharp. My heart didn't just break. It curdled. Every image of Harper I'd ever cherished, our wedding, the moment she first told me, I love you, the night we painted the nursery, warped into lies draped in sentiment. They were planning to impregnate her with Eli's posthumous DNA. Behind my back. And I was to be the oblivious, smiling fool raising the shadow of another man's legacy. I didn't confront her that night. No, that would have been too merciful. The pregnancy came just 2 months later. Harper beamed when she told me the news, tears welling in her eyes like she was carrying a miracle. I kissed her forehead and played the role, the proud husband, the excited future father, the sap. Inside, I was building a storm. I started documenting. Quietly. Every appointment. Every clinic visit. I pulled phone records. I even planted a small audio recorder in her purse the night she went to dinner with a friend. It was Rin. And their conversation confirmed everything. 9 months blurred by. I never once faltered in my mask. She leaned on me. Slept beside me. Let me name the child Avery, because it meant ruler of the elves, and I thought the irony would be a poetic footnote once the truth came to light. But nothing prepared me for what happened in the hospital. The delivery was rough. They wheeled her in screaming. I paced the hall, hands clenched, rage and anticipation threading through my nerves like barbed wire. When the nurse finally emerged, her face was pale. Sir, she said gently, the doctor wants to speak with you privately. He says, what you are about to see may shock you. My breath caught. Was Harper okay? The baby? I walked into that hospital room expecting chaos. But nothing prepared me for what I saw. Not the blood. Not the twisted, dazed look on Harper's face. Not the crying infant. What the doctor held in his hands, that shattered me in a way even betrayal hadn't. The doctor didn't speak right away. He just looked at me, this haunted, tight-lipped expression I'd only seen on veterans and morticians. Then he held out the baby, wrapped in sterile linens, tiny, squirming, red-faced. But it wasn't the child that froze me in place. It was the eyes. They were dark, jet black, opaque, like tiny obsidian marbles. Not newborn gray, not blue waiting to shift, just pure black. Something's wrong, I said, my voice coming out hollow. He nodded slowly. We were in tests. Multiple scans. I've only seen something like this once before, during a genetic study in Boston. It's called, well, it doesn't have an official name, but it's the result of recombinant DNA instability. Artificial insemination gone very wrong. I blinked. What are you saying? He exhaled. Sir, this child's DNA doesn't match yours. We ran a standard test for the records. It's protocol when there's inconsistency in blood typing. The child isn't yours. But more than that, the DNA shows anomalies. Spliced markers. It's as if someone used a sample that had degraded, then tried to stabilize it. Manually. With foreign genetic material. Everything around me seemed to blur. My blood went cold. You mean the sample? Eli's. Should never have been used, the doctor cut in grimly. And definitely not altered. But someone did. The result? Well, come see for yourself. He led me to the viewing window. Inside, in a separate room, nurses tended to a small incubator, The baby was there, hooked up to machines, breathing, but twitching, like he wasn't used to his own limbs. His fingers were too long, almost insect-thin. The whites of his eyes hadn't formed fully. And for one chilling second, I swear he smiled. Not the reflexive kind newborns do. No, this was different. Like he knew. The doctor muttered, "It's not just a failed insemination. This, whatever this is, it was tampered with." I stumbled back into Harper's room. She was propped up in bed, pale and exhausted, but the look on her face was wrong. She wasn't joyful. She wasn't even relieved. She looked afraid. "James," she whispered. "You want to tell me," I said slowly, "exactly what you and your sister did?" Tears welled in her eyes. But I didn't care. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Wren handled the clinic. I just wanted to keep a part of him. I loved Eli. You knew that. You said you understood." "I understood grief," I said, my voice steel. What I didn't understand was deception. Lying to me. Using me. Letting me name him. Letting me think. I choked. Fist clenched. "You let me think this was ours." Harper reached out, but I stepped back. "The doctor says his DNA was altered. That it wasn't just Eli's biomaterial. That something's wrong." She hesitated. Her face crumbled. "Wren said it had degraded. Bet they added something from a donor bank." I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. "You didn't want to know?" I hissed. "You Frankensteined a child into this world, and now you're playing the victim?" That night, I sat in the hospital parking lot. Rain fell like static against the windshield. I stared at the discharge papers in my hands, at the name I'd written with pride just hours earlier. Avery Eli Carter. Except now, he wasn't mine. Not legally. Not biologically. Not spiritually. He wasn't anyone's. And yet, I couldn't walk away. Not yet. Not until I knew the truth. I picked up my phone, opened my hidden recorder folder, and replayed Wren's voice. "We'll do it through the clinic. Quiet. Discreet. Just use the samples Eli stored." I had a name, a clinic, a date, and enough righteous fury to burn every lie they built to the damn ground. They tried to make me a father through fraud. They were about to find out what happens when a man who's lost everything finds his spine. T's funny how betrayal doesn't burn all at once. No, it sinks in like a slow venom. 1 minute, you're choking on disbelief. The next, you're ice cold, clear-headed, calculating. I drove straight from the hospital to the clinic listed on Harper's prenatal folder, St. Alden's Fertility and Genetic Wellness. Sounds gentle, right? Like a spa for embryos. Except behind those frosted glass doors was where my life had been hijacked. Reception was deserted. Late night, just after midnight, the whole place hummed under dim security lights. But luck, or maybe something darker, was on my side. A janitor was mopping the tile floor, earbuds in, back to me. I slipped through the hallway like I'd done it 100 times. I already knew the room, 2B Genetic Archives. Saw it on the folder's barcode printout when Harper handed it to the nurse last week. She probably thought I wasn't paying attention. I was always paying attention. The door was locked, but I brought tools. Let's just say I didn't always work an office job. My younger years taught me more than Harper ever knew, about leverage, about force, about how sometimes a bent rule is just a shortcut to the truth. 2 minutes later, I was inside. Cold air kissed my skin. Refrigerated units lined the walls, glowing softly with LED backlights. Each vial was labeled, initials, dates, batch codes. The air smelled like ethanol and lies. I scanned 4 EW Eli winners. And there it was. Vial EW, 11/03, Puri Chemo Storage. Next to it, 2 more vials. EW modified. EW plus donor sample 514B. I stared at them. My hands actually shook. They hadn't just used Eli's original biomaterial. They'd spliced it with something else. Modified it. Like they were patching code in a corrupted file. A Frankenstein fix for broken DNA. Then I found the logbook. Inside were signatures. One stood out like red paint on snow. Wren winners. Dated 6 months ago. Underneath, procedure approved by authorized family rep due to sample degradation. Donor mix confirmed. Sample 514B. She signed off. She authorized it. My wife's sister. The puppet master behind the scenes, smiling at me every Christmas, every birthday, knowing full well what she was building in her sister's womb. The next morning, I confronted Harper. She was home now. Lying on the couch, baby Avery in a bassinet beside her. Pale. Silent. She looked up when I walked in, saw the folder in my hands. The evidence. The vials. The printouts. Her face cracked. James? No. Don't speak. Not yet. I tossed the printout on her lap. You didn't just use Eli's DNA. You doctored it. You spliced it. With something from a donor. She blinked. I didn't know. I told Ren to handle it. I didn't know she altered. Bull, I snapped. You knew. Maybe not the details. But you knew she wasn't going to let anything get in the way of her little resurrection fantasy. And you let it happen. You let me believe this child was mine. You let me name him. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't mean? Harper, this isn't a broken dish. This is a life. A child. One that's not mine, not yours, not even Eli's anymore. Do you understand what you've done? Silence. Then I looked at Avery. Still asleep. Still peaceful. But now, every twitch in his tiny frame looked like something alien. Engineered. Unnatural. You're not fit to raise him, I said finally. Neither is Ren. And I swear, if you think you're going to parade this baby around as some tragic miracle, what are you going to do? She whispered. I smiled. Cold. Quiet. The kind of smile men wear when they've made peace with war. I'm going to bury you in the truth. That afternoon, I walked into a lawyer's office. Not just any lawyer. My cousin Max, a guy who cut his teeth exposing biotech fraud and burning corrupt clinics to the ground. I handed him the vials, the logbook, the hospital report, everything. He whistled low. You're sitting on a time bomb. This is lawsuit gold. Civil, medical, hell, maybe even criminal. I want custody, I said, of a child that isn't yours. I don't care about DNA, I said flatly. That kid didn't ask to be born into a circus of lies. If Harper can build this Frankenstein behind my back, imagine what else she's capable of. Max nodded slowly. We'll start there, he said. And when the dust clears, she'll be lucky if she's allowed to visit. They stole a future from me, so I'm building a new one on my terms. This time, the truth isn't just on my side. It's my weapon. If you've ever watched a storm roll in over flatland, slow, distant thunder crawling closer until it explodes over your head, then you know exactly how the courtroom felt the morning we filed the petition. I walked in flanked by Max, my cousin, and my lawyer. Calm on the surface, but inside, I was bracing for the strike. Across the aisle sat Harper, hair pinned, makeup flawless, nerves barely concealed beneath her polished shell. And beside her, Ren, of course, like some smug co-pilot, still clinging to the illusion of control, like she hadn't derailed 3 lives already. Mr. Carter, the judge began, you are petitioning for full legal custody of a child not biologically yours. On what grounds? Max stood, his voice crisp. On the grounds that Mr. Carter was deceived into assuming paternal responsibility under fraudulent pretenses. The child, Avery, was the result of an unauthorized genetic modification performed without Mr. Carter's knowledge or consent. We have documented proof. He handed over the evidence folder, printouts from the clinic, signed documents, genetic analyses, even the audio recordings I'd gathered of Harper and Ren conspiring. The judge raised an eyebrow. This is unusual. You could say that, I muttered. Harper's lawyer, some big-shot family law guy with a reputation for theatrics, stood and gave the most polished lie I'd ever heard. Your Honor, Miss Carter was grieving. She acted in emotional distress, never intending to deceive. She only wanted to preserve a part of her late fiancé's memory. Her current husband, he nodded at me, was fully aware of her history and supported her throughout. I stood. I supported a lie, I said, cutting in. Not a legacy. A lie. She didn't preserve his memory. She manufactured it. The courtroom went quiet. Even the judge leaned forward. That night, I sat at the edge of the guest bed at Max's place, staring at a photo of Avery. Still a baby. Still innocent. But every time I looked at him, all I saw were the strings being pulled behind the scenes. A child born from grief, grafted from DNA like he was someone's science project. But none of that was his fault. That was the gut punch of it all. I hated the betrayal. I hated the scheme. But that child? He was as real as any son I might have had, just born from a lie. So I stayed in the fight. A week later, we presented testimony from the clinic's technician. Some poor intern Ren had pressured into fast-tracking the approval. His voice shook on the stand. She said it was all pre-approved, that the donor sample had been cleared. I didn't realize it hadn't been sanctioned by both parties. I'm sorry. Harper's face paled. Ren? She barely blinked. We submitted financial records, emails, time-stamped appointments. And then came the kicker, the video footage. The one from the hospital showing the child's irregular responses during the first hour of life. The medical anomalies. The black eyes. The signs of instability the hospital quietly buried to avoid scandal. Even the judge looked rattled. He called for a recess. Outside, Harper caught up to me in the corridor. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Her voice cracked. "You said you didn't want the baby." I said I didn't want the lie. I corrected. "I do want him. More than anything. Which is why he's better off with someone who won't use him to resurrect ghosts." Tears streamed down her face. "You can't take him from me. I'm his mother. And I'm the man who would have been his father if you hadn't turned him into a secret science experiment." She flinched at that. Good. Maybe guilt could rot her faster than I ever could. The ruling came 3 weeks later. Joint custody. Supervised visitation for Harper. Wren? Banned from contact. The judge had one last thing to say. "In my entire career," he said, voice heavy, "I've never seen parenthood weaponized like this. Mr. Carter, you were wronged. But I hope you understand that this child is not responsible for the sins of the adults who brought him into this world. It will be your burden and your opportunity to give him truth without bitterness." I nodded. Bitterness, I could manage. But truth? Truth was mine now. Later that night, I stood beside Avery's crib. He looked up at me with those inky black eyes, still eerie, still unlike anything I'd ever seen. But he reached up, tiny fingers wrapping around one of mine. For the first time, I didn't pull away. "You're not him," I whispered. "You're not Eli. You're not their fantasy. You're something new. And maybe that's enough." I made him a promise then. I wouldn't lie to him. But I wouldn't let him become their mistake either. You'd think a court order would be enough to keep a woman like Wren out of our lives. It wasn't. Some people, they don't understand boundaries. Especially when they think the world owes them something. Wren wasn't just a sister grieving a dead fiancé. She was a storm that believed it could rewrite biology and family law and still walk away clean. So when the social worker knocked on my door one gray Friday morning with a folder in hand and a look that said "brace yourself," I knew. She handed me a sheet. Petition for emergency reevaluation of custody due to alleged psychological instability of guardian. Filed by Wren Winters. I laughed. Actually laughed. Right there in the doorway like a lunatic. Not because it was funny, but because of how absurd it was. "Is this a joke?" I asked. The social worker didn't blink. "We're required to follow up." "I'm sorry." Turns out Wren had filed a complaint. Said I was emotionally erratic. That I had exhibited signs of mental duress and may not be stable enough to raise an infant. Her proof? Excerpts from my therapy records, which were sealed, and a testimony from a neighbor who'd seen me yelling in the garage one night. That was the night I found Avery's baby blanket shredded in the washing machine after Harper accidentally used bleach. The blanket I'd kept from the hospital. The one I wrapped him in that first night he cried in my arms. Was I yelling? Yeah, I was yelling at the past, at the betrayal, at the weight of raising a child who felt like both a stranger and a responsibility I didn't ask for. But was I unstable? No. I was angry. And still standing. Max went nuclear. He filed a motion for full restraining order against Wren. But I did something different. I invited her to coffee. Yeah, I did. I needed to look her in the eye. To understand what made someone gamble with another man's fatherhood and then double down when the cards came up bloodstained. We met at a quiet corner cafe. Neutral ground. She walked in like she owned the air between us. Not even a flicker of shame. Designer coat, smug expression, like I was the unreasonable one for not wanting to raise her Frankenstein child. "You know," she said, sipping her drink, "you could have had a perfect little life. A family. A clean narrative." I stared. "You think this was about narrative?" Wren shrugged. "Harper was lost. Eli was everything to her. And you, well, you were always just background noise. Let me ask you something," I said, voice cold. "Why did you really do it?" She tilted her head. "Do what?" "Use the modified sample. You knew it was unstable. You knew. So what?" She smiled then, like a villain from a novel who's been waiting 5 chapters to monologue. "I wanted to see if it would work," she said. "Do you know how rare viable postmortem insemination is? Let alone combined with gene therapy? We're talking Nobel-level data." "And Avery?" I asked. "What is he to you?" "A goddamn thesis." "Don't be dramatic," she said, waving a hand. "He's loved." "No," I said. He's a trophy, and you're not getting near him again. Back in court, the judge read our countermotion. Max had found the leak in the clinic system. Wren had impersonated Harper on the forms. Used Harper's ID. Signed her name. Digital forensics confirmed it. That was the kill shot. The judge revoked any remaining visitation rights for Wren. Placed her under formal restriction from initiating legal actions related to the child without psychological clearance. Harper? She didn't even show up. I heard later she'd left the state. Maybe trying to escape the fallout. Maybe realizing that the house of lies she built had finally collapsed. Avery turned 6 months old that week. He started smiling more. Laughing. The dark eyes still unsettled people, sure, but I started to see something else in them. Not just the shadow of a twisted legacy, but the spark of something unformed. A blank page, waiting to be written by someone honest. That night, I held him close. Watched the rain streak the windows. You're not a science experiment, I whispered. You're not a second coming. And you're not a mistake. I kissed his head. You're mine. Not by blood, but by fire. By the time fall rolled in, the leaves weren't the only things that had changed. The town had begun to whisper. Not loud enough to spark scandal, but in a community where everyone knew your mailbox and the name of your dog, the silence said more than words ever could. Have you heard what happened to the Carters? He's raising the baby by himself, right? They say it's not even his. I ignored it. Most days. But some days, like the Wednesday afternoon when I caught 2 PTA moms staring through the grocery store window while I buckled Avery into his car seat, I wanted to slam my fist into something just to feel grounded. Let him talk. None of them were there the night I rocked that baby to sleep while he fought a fever and Harper never even called. None of them read the reports. The ones that said Avery's genetic makeup might trigger future health complications due to recombinant instability. None of them knew what it was like to sing lullabies to a child who, by all legal and scientific accounts, shouldn't exist. But then came the package. No return address. Just my name. Neatly typed. No postage. Hand-delivered. Inside, a flash drive, and a single sheet of paper. You don't know the full story. I plugged it into the spare laptop. Max had drilled that into me. Never your main system. Always isolate unknown data. The folder on the drive held video files. Clinic footage. Security cams from before the insemination date. I sat motionless as the grainy black and white footage played out. Wren, not just authorizing the procedure, but editing the vial labels. She had access. She had codes. She replaced not 1, but 2 donor vials. Then the footage cut. To her, in a lab room, with a man I didn't recognize. He handed her a briefcase. She handed him paperwork. The file was labeled, Private Investment, Bioresilience Trials, Subject A. I froze. This wasn't grief. This wasn't sisterly devotion. This was experimentation. Avery wasn't just a hybrid. He was an asset. I called Max. He drove over in 20. We ran facial recognition on the man in the footage. Dr. Leonard Kessler, former geneticist for a privately funded European biomedical firm, stripped of credentials in 2018 after reports of unethical embryo modification trials. Disappeared shortly after. Guess who funded his research? A shell company under Wren Winter's name. Max leaned back in the chair, eyes wide. This wasn't a personal favor. She funded the resurrection of Eli's DNA as a pilot project. And Harper? I asked. Did she know? Max sighed. If she did, she kept her hands clean. This changed everything. We weren't just talking about betrayal anymore. This was biotech fraud. Human experimentation. And I had the child to prove it. But this time, I wasn't walking into a courtroom. I was walking into a press conference. We went public. Not with anger. Not with fire. That would come later. We went with facts. Leaked it through a journalist friend of Max's. A slow drip, laced with enough credibility to trigger interest, but not enough to spook the legal system into freezing the story. Illicit genetic experiments in suburban fertility clinic. Mother impregnated with altered DNA, lawsuit imminent. Inside the story of the baby who shouldn't exist. Suddenly, Wren's world began to collapse. Sponsors pulled out. The clinic got raided. Wren went silent. And Harper? She finally called. Her voice shook. I didn't know, she said. Not about that. I just wanted to keep a piece of Eli, I finished. Yeah, I know. There was silence on the line. Can I see him? She asked quietly. No, not out of revenge. Not out of anger. but because I'd seen the difference between people who want a child and people who use one. Avery started crawling that week. Across the rug, across the hardwood, a tiny storm of momentum and wonder. When he laughed, that unfiltered baby laugh that pierces straight through your ribs, I felt something strange bloom in my chest. Pride. Not just in him. In me. In surviving the fire and coming out stronger. Sharper. Cold in the right ways, warm in the right places. This wasn't the family I expected, but it was the one I'd fought for. You ever notice how quiet the world gets just before it turns upside down? That's how it felt the morning the article hit national news. I was feeding Avery, spooning mashed peas while he made a face like I'd just served him poison, when my phone lit up like a Christmas tree on fire. CNN, The Guardian, NPR, all echoing the same headline. Designer baby scandal. Suburban father exposes genetic tampering cover-up. And just like that, we weren't a quiet domestic dispute anymore. We were Exhibit A in a war between ethics and ambition. I stayed off social media. Max advised it. Let the public chew on the story, he said, but don't give them a bone to gnaw you with. But Harper didn't listen. Of course she didn't. She posted a carefully filtered photo of Avery, dressed in a soft blue onesie, smiling like the world hadn't just found out he was engineered in a petri dish by a woman with a messiah complex. Caption: My heart. My miracle. Hashtag blessed beyond measure. The comments were predictable. He's beautiful. Ignore the noise. Praying for your family. People are just jealous you had options most of us don't. But buried beneath the sympathy was a rot. Someone found the court documents. Another posted a screenshot of the donor modification file. And then one comment hit like a gunshot. So this is what postmortem eugenics looks like? 2 days later, I got the letter. Delivered by hand. Heavy envelope. Wax seal. Legal notice from the Magnus Institute for Advanced Biogenetics. I opened it with the same dread you feel when a storm siren goes off at 3 a.m. Inside, a cease and desist order. Polite on the surface. Threatening underneath. Your public statements have compromised a confidential research interest. Cease distribution of unverified clinic documents. Further dissemination will result in legal action and possible custody review. Custody review. That's when I knew. They didn't want Avery out of the headlines. They wanted him back in a lab. Max had already read it before I finished my coffee. You're not giving them anything, he said. This isn't about rights. This is about control. They see that kid as a patent now. He's not a patent, I growled. He's a person. They don't care, Max replied. He's a sequence. A data set. A miracle with a barcode. I looked over at Avery. He was playing with a stuffed elephant. Innocent. Oblivious. But the thought of someone watching him through a pane of reinforced glass. Testing, prodding, labeling. That's when something broke in me. This wasn't just about Harper or Wren anymore. This was about every faceless suit that thought science gave them permission to rewrite what it meant to be human. So I fought fire with frost. I filed a restraining order, not against a person, but a corporation. We used the Magnus Institute's own research grant trails to prove intent, a documented interest in embryonic gene stabilization, with Wren Winters listed as a silent donor. It was slow, painful, expensive, but it forced them into a corner. Because now it was them on trial. And me? I was the father willing to burn the world down to protect a boy born of lies. The judge granted temporary immunity. Avery couldn't be contacted, researched, tested, not without my permission. The order didn't just give me peace. It made me dangerous. That night, Harper called again. Do you hate me? She asked. Quiet. Fragile. I don't hate you, I said. I just stopped believing you deserved forgiveness. She didn't argue. I wish I'd known, she whispered. You did, I replied. You just didn't care until you lost control. As I tucked Avery into bed, I looked at the scar behind his left ear, tiny, almost invisible. A mark from a procedure I never approved. One Wren probably orchestrated before the birth. A reminder that even before he took his first breath, someone else had claimed ownership. Not anymore. Not ever again. You'd think a restraining order would stop them. You'd think a judge's signature, black ink on white paper, would be enough to make people back off, fold their hand, and walk away. But these weren't ordinary people. These were the kinds of people who fund research anonymously, who sit on private boards, who can pay for silence with one phone call and bury truths deeper than cemeteries. 3 days after the injunction, my security system flagged movement in my backyard. 2:43 a.m. motion detected. South fence. Brief. then gone. At first, I thought maybe it was a raccoon or a stray. Then I found the footprint in the mulch bed below Avery's window. A man's boot. Size 11. No mistake. They weren't just watching. They were checking access points. Max installed a full perimeter system the next day. Cameras. Glass break sensors. A panic button hardwired under the baby's crib. "This is war now," he muttered, screwing the last mount into the eaves. "You've humiliated them. They're not gonna take that lightly." I knew he was right. Because that night, another letter arrived. No seal this time. No legal flair. Just a plain manila envelope slid under the front door like it was some mob movie from the 80s. Inside? A single Polaroid. Avery. Taken through the daycare window. The back of the photo said, "He belongs to the future. Not you." I called the police. Filed a report. But let me tell you something about threats wrapped in intelligence and money. They're hard to prove. Harder to trace. The cop looked at me like I was paranoid. Another overprotective dad with custody trauma and a grudge. But I wasn't angry. I was focused. Max and I pulled strings. Found a contact in private cyber investigations. A woman named Jules who used to work in defense intel. She analyzed the envelope. "No fingerprints," she said. "But the chemical treatment on the paper? That's not office supply store material. That's institutional grade. Think government. Think biotech. Think black budget." She paused. "This wasn't a warning. It was a promise," I said. She nodded. "They're telling you they can reach him anytime. That your house? Your court orders? All of it means nothing." She handed me a burner phone. "When it starts, don't call the cops. Call me." I pulled Avery out of daycare the next morning. Quit my job the next week. Liquidated assets. Cut off everything that could be tracked or subpoenaed. To the outside world, it looked like I was losing it. But the truth was simple. I wasn't running. I was removing pieces from the board. Then came the call. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer. But instinct said pick up. A voice came through, calm, confident, practiced. "Mr. Carter, you've made things very complicated." I didn't speak. We only wanted access. Shared data. A controlled environment. But you chose publicity. Conflict. You're making this adversarial. I stared at Avery sleeping in the crook of my arm. "You broke into my life," I said. "Tampered with a child. Lied to courts. Threatened my son." A long pause. "Mr. Carter, he's not your son." That did it. I didn't shout. Didn't curse. Just smiled. The kind of smile you wear when your soul's ice and the world's trying to set you on fire. "Say that again," I said. Click. The line went dead. Max had a plan. We go louder. Bigger. Congressional inquiry. "And if that makes them desperate?" I asked. He just looked at me. "They're already desperate. We're past defense, James. We go on the offensive." So that's what we did. Next week, a documentary team arrives. The footage, the files, the timeline, everything goes into the public record. This isn't just about one child anymore. It's about the kind of world where people in lab coats and boardrooms believe they can create life and own it. But Avery? He's not a product. He's not a miracle. He's mine. And I'll burn the whole damn machine to ash before I let them lay a finger on him. Funny how quiet things got after that phone call. No new letters. No footprints. No surveillance vans idling half a block away. It wasn't peace. It was the kind of stillness you hear in the woods right before something lunges at your throat. The silence predators make when they're waiting for you to let your guard down. But I didn't. Not this time. I kept Avery close. Moved into a secure rental on the outskirts of town under a shell name Max set up. No social media. No routines. I became a ghost, living in the margins, raising a child born from the bones of hubris. But then came the email. Encrypted. Untraceable sender. Sent to Max. Subject line. "We've decided to make an example." Inside was a video clip. Grainy. Shaky. Max's car, our car, actually, since we'd been using it for transport, parked outside a safe house. Then a cut. Avery's face. Zoomed in through the blinds. Smiling. Laughing. And then a crosshair overlay blinking red across the screen. Artificial. Meant to scare. It worked. Not because I thought they'd kill him. Because I knew what they really wanted. Control. Submission. And that made me smile. Because if there's one thing I'd lost the capacity for, it was submission. Max went into full war mode. Pulled favors. Dug deeper. Found bank trails. Wire transfers. One particular offshore account caught our attention. a payment from a biotech shelf firm to a consulting group called Vire Solutions. We looked into them. That's when things got ugly. Vire Solutions had ties to behavioral testing environments. That's polite language for corporate-run experimental zones in countries without regulatory watchdogs. Places where you don't ask how test subjects got there. You just record results. And guess what? One of their internal reports, buried under 8 layers of encryption, listed a term that made my skin crawl. Subject lineage, AC/code name, Avery. They'd named him in a corporate file, not as a child, as property. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor next to Avery's crib, holding a document Max had pulled from that same encrypted trove. It wasn't a test result. It was a contract between Ren Winters and Vire Solutions. 3 years ago, pre-pregnancy, titled Controlled Live Birth Sequence Trial, Stage I Implementation. In the fine print, donor surrogate to carry hybrid embryo under guise of elective IVF. Parental figure to remain unaware until postnatal phase. Data collected in Phase 1 to determine viability of future asset design. I threw up. Then I sat there and wept. Not for myself, but because I finally realized something brutal. Harper never drifted into deception. She signed up for it. She wasn't a victim. She was complicit. So we burned it all down. Max assembled a legal kill shot. Documents, emails, footage, the contract, audio recordings. We packaged it like a dossier from a war tribunal and delivered it to one person who could set fire to everything. Senator Halloran, a woman with a reputation for grilling tech execs like rotisserie chickens in front of Congress. And she bit. Within 2 weeks, the subpoena went out. Vire, Magnus, the clinic, Ren. Every one of them called to testify before the Committee on Bioethics and Emerging Technologies. And they had no idea what was coming. I got a call from Halloran's aide 2 days before the hearing. You'll be seated behind the panel, he said. She wants you visible. Why? Because you're not just the father, Mr. Carter. You're the face. And that's when I knew. They thought they were creating the future. But the real future was the man who fought back. The father who refused to surrender. The child who lived. The chamber was colder than I expected. Marble floors. Heavy oak paneling. Cameras mounted like eyes on the walls. The Committee on Bioethics and Emerging Technologies, not exactly a name that screams justice, but that day, it became the arena where the truth bared its teeth. I sat behind Senator Halloran as instructed. Front row. Direct line of sight to every bastard who helped orchestrate the lie that redefined my life. Avery sat on my lap, 6 months old, cheeks flushed, eyes black as onyx. The very child these people tried to catalog like inventory. He cooed. Reached for my tie. God, he had no idea the war I'd waged to get him to this moment. And that's how it should be. They brought Ren in first. She was dressed like she was walking into a charity gala, power suit, pearl necklace, smug composure intact. But that cracked quick under the opening volley. Halloran didn't even clear her throat before firing. Ms. Winters, you authorized an experimental embryo transfer using altered DNA from your deceased fiancé without proper consent. Correct? Ren blinked. It was emotionally complicated. The consent was... Let me rephrase, Halloran snapped. Did you sign a contract with Vire Solutions to turn your unborn nephew into a live trial? The silence that followed could have fractured glass. Then came the tapes. We timed it perfectly. Max's team dumped our entire dossier to the press at the same moment Ren opened her mouth. Live coverage. Public. Permanent. On screen. The clinic logs. The bank transfers. The contract with her signature. And finally, the surveillance video of Ren altering the donor vials. Ren didn't speak again. Her lawyer whispered something, and she sat down like a house of cards collapsing in slow motion. Next was Dr. Latham, head of Magnus Institute's Innovation Division. Slicked back hair, fake humility, crocodile remorse. He tried the usual corporate dance, terms like data integrity, biofuturism, proprietary metrics. Halloran sliced through it. You didn't design a cure. You designed a child with a barcode. We believe in pushing boundaries for the betterment of mankind. Tell me, doctor, how much better was mankind after you stalked a father and marked his son for acquisition? His hands shook by the end. Then they brought me forward. I stood, Avery in my arms. No speech. No theatrics. Just truth. I loved a woman who lied to me, I began. I raised a child who wasn't mine by blood, but became mine by choice. I was targeted, manipulated, watched. But I didn't run. I protected my son. Not because he was perfect, but because he was real. I looked toward the camera, at every parent watching from home who ever questioned the system but didn't know where to fight back. You can't patent humanity, I said. You can't engineer loyalty. You can't code love. What you can do is destroy trust. That's what these people did. Avery stirred in my arms, small hand grasping my collar. I finished. Not anymore. The fallout was biblical. Ren Winters, indicted on multiple counts of bioethical violations, conspiracy to commit fraud, and unlawful human experimentation. Magnus Institute, dismantled by federal seizure. Vire Solutions, hit with international bans and investor walkouts so severe the CEO resigned mid-interview. The clinic, shuttered. Permanently. Even Harper was forced to testify, and though the public showed her a shred of sympathy, she disappeared afterward. No goodbye. No apology. Just silence. I didn't need one. A year later, I sat in the backyard of our new home, a quiet stretch of woods far from the city. Avery toddled through the grass chasing fireflies, his laugh high and clear. He looked different. Not just physically, though his eyes were lightening, softening to a stormy gray. He looked free. No labels. No labs. No ghosts. Just a boy with skin knees and wild hair. Mine. Entirely mine. People sometimes ask me if I regret any of it. If I'd undo the whole thing if I could go back. And I tell them this. I lost a marriage. I lost friends. I lost peace. But I gained a reason to never let anyone write my story for me again. And more importantly, I gained a son. Not by biology. Not by science. But by fire. They say time heals everything. That's a lie. Time doesn't heal. People do. Or they don't. And some wounds? You just learn to live around them, like cracks in your bones that remind you where the breaking happened. But 5 years on, we're still standing. Avery's 6 now. And if there's one thing he's never lacked, it's fire. Kid's brilliant. Curious in a way that makes teachers nervous, always asking why, always poking at rules like they're suggestions. But he's kind, too. Got this fierce gentleness about him. Like he understands the world isn't safe, and he's decided to make it better anyway. I never told him the full story. Not yet. But one day, I will. Because secrets are just lies with better lighting, and he deserves more than that. He deserves truth. I still keep the file. The original dossier. Court documents. Contracts. A copy of that photo they slid under my door, now burned around the edges and framed in my study. Not because I need revenge anymore. Because I need to remember what we survived. And what I protected him from. As for Harper, she reached out once. A letter. No return address. No apology. Just a line scrawled in her shaky handwriting. You were always the better parent. I burned it without a word. Ren's in prison. Minimum security. Some biotech ethics facility dressed up like rehab for geniuses who went too far. Every few years she petitions for review. Every time, she's denied. I've never visited. Never will. Avery asked me once why he doesn't have a real mom. I told him the truth. She couldn't stay. He nodded like he understood something bigger than the words. Like maybe he felt it, not as pain, but as clarity. Then he asked if he could have another cookie. Just like that. Some nights, I sit out on the porch and watch him sleep through the monitor. And I wonder how different things could have been. If I hadn't overheard that conversation. If I hadn't fought. If I'd just accepted the story I was handed. And every time, the same thought returns. Thank God I didn't. This isn't a story about grief. Or even betrayal. It's a story about rebirth, not the poetic kind, but the gritty, soul-shattering kind where you claw yourself out of the wreckage and build something better with your bare hands. Not in spite of the fire. Because of it. Avery calls me now. Wants help building his cardboard spaceship. Says he's heading to Mars tonight. I smile. Just wait till I tell you what you survived to get here, kid. I whisper to myself as I head inside. You're already light years ahead. There's a moment, right around 13, when a boy's voice changes. But Avery's? It didn't just change pitch. It carried weight. Like all the echoes of the fire he never saw but somehow still remembers. The kind of voice that belongs to someone who was forged, not just raised. That was the year he asked. It happened on a cold Saturday in October. I was in the garage, tuning up the old Triumph, same one I'd ridden away from the courthouse a decade ago. Avery strapped to my chest like a secret weapon. He walked in, lanky frame, dark hair falling over one eye, carrying a manila envelope I hadn't seen in years. The file. The file. Max had kept a copy, stashed in our house in a fireproof box. I never told Avery what was in it, But I told him one day it'd be his to open. He had. Now he stood in front of me, file in hand. Dad, he said. Just that one word. I killed the engine. And in that silence, I saw it all flicker behind his eyes. The truth. The experiments. The betrayal. The birth engineered in grief and greed. But what shook me most was what he didn't ask. He didn't ask why I never told him sooner. He didn't ask if it was true. He didn't ask what kind of monster would do this. He asked, "Why'd you keep me?" I stared at him. Not because I didn't have the answer. Because I've been waiting years to say it out loud. Because you weren't theirs, I said. You were never theirs. You were never a project. Never a patent. Never a second chance at someone else's fantasy. I stood up, crossed to him, put my hands on his shoulders. You were mine the moment I heard you cry. You were mine when they tried to take you. You were mine when they said you weren't real. His eyes welled. But he didn't blink. He took it. All of it. Are they still out there? He asked. Some of them. Pieces. Burned out companies. Shady labs in other countries. He nodded. Think they'll try again? Probably, I said. Then I added, but they'll never get you. Avery started writing after that. Journals. Letters to himself. A few short stories. One was about a boy grown from stolen stars, raised by a broken man who taught him to build shields from fire. He let me read it once. It tore me in half. Not because it was sad. Because it was hopeful. 15 now. He's top of his class. Full scholarship offers from bioethics programs and AI think tanks. Irony not lost on either of us. Says he wants to study boundaries. Where science ends and soul begins. I asked him recently if he ever hated Harper. He shook his head. She made me. That's not nothing. But she didn't raise me. You did. And Ren? She wanted a legacy. I'll give her one, he said. Every time I make a decision she wouldn't. As for me, I sleep easier now. Not because the past is gone. Because the future's in better hands. Sometimes Avery still looks at the stars like they owe him something. And maybe they do. But me? I just look at him. And I know. I won. Not with rage. Not with revenge. But with resilience. With truth. With a love no lab could synthesize.